The morning my daughter-in-law told me to stay out of my own kitchen, she was standing in front of my stove, wearing my apron, using my cast-iron skillet, the one my mother gave me 40 years ago, and she didn't even look up when she said it. "We're trying to have a family breakfast, Margaret. You can eat after." I stood in the doorway of the kitchen I had cooked in for 31 years. I looked at my son. He was buttering toast. He didn't say a word. I turned around and walked back to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for a long time. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, I had made a phone call that changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. The way these things always have to be told, from the part where you think you're doing something good. My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old. I taught high school English for 34 years in a small city outside of Houston, Texas. I retired 4 years ago with a pension, a paid-off house, and 2 cats named Steinbeck and Flannery. I had a routine I loved. Coffee at 6:30, a walk at 7, reading on the back porch until noon. My house was quiet in the way that only a person who has earned their quiet truly understands. My son, Daniel, is 41. He's a good-looking man, the kind who photographs well and talks easily in rooms full of strangers. He married a woman named Carla 6 years ago. I was at the wedding. I bought them a gift from their registry and danced at the reception, and told Carla I was so happy to have her in our family, and I meant every word. They had a baby girl 2 years into the marriage, my granddaughter, Lily. She was born with my son's eyes and a laugh that could fill a house. I drove to see her the week she came home from the hospital. I brought meals for 2 weeks. I stayed for 4 days and helped however I could. That is what mothers do. For the first few years, everything was manageable. They lived 40 minutes from me. I visited on Sundays. Carla was polite in the way that a person can be polite without ever being warm. I noticed it, but I told myself it was just her personality. Some people take longer to open up. I was patient. Then Daniel lost his job. He was in medical device sales, and the company restructured, and one day he called me and said they were letting people go, and he was one of them. He wasn't panicking. He said he'd find something new in a few months. Carla had her job. She managed accounts for a marketing firm, and they had some savings. They would be fine. 3 months later, he called again. He asked if they could stay with me while they got back on their feet. Just for a little while, he said. Maybe 4 or 5 months. They needed to save on rent. He said it with the tone I remembered from when he was 17 and had broken my car's side mirror and was working up to telling me. I said yes, of course. He was my son. Lily was 3 years old. The house had 3 bedrooms. There was no version of me that could say no. They moved in on a Saturday in March. I had cleaned the guest room, bought new towels, put a nightlight in the hallway for Lily. I had made room in the refrigerator and cleared half the closet in the entryway. I was happy to do it. I want to be honest about that in the beginning. I was genuinely happy. The first month was fine. A little crowded, louder than I was used to, but fine. Lily would crawl into my bed in the mornings, and we would read together before breakfast. Those moments made everything worth it. The second month, small things started to shift. Carla began rearranging the kitchen. Not dramatically at first, just moving things to different cabinets. I would reach for a glass and it would be somewhere new. I would open a drawer for a spatula and find it in a different place. I didn't say anything. It was a small thing. Then she bought new throw pillows for the living room couch without asking. Then she replaced my dish soap with a brand she preferred. Then she started scheduling grocery deliveries that included things I would never buy and excluding things I used every week. I told myself she was nesting. She was a woman living in someone else's house, and maybe this was how she coped. I told myself to be generous. But the rearranging moved from objects to time. She started planning the household schedule when the television was used, when meals were served, when Lily had her bath. She would write out a weekly plan and leave it on the refrigerator as though it had been agreed upon, even though I had never been consulted. I went to Daniel about the dish soap. I know how small that sounds. But sometimes the small things are where you find the shape of the larger problem. I told him I would appreciate being included in decisions about the household. He looked at me with a kind of tired patience and said Carla was just trying to help and I should talk to her directly. I tried. Carla listened to me, speak with her eyes very still and her mouth in a neutral position. And when I finished, she said, "I hear you, Margaret. I'll keep that in mind." Then she went back to what she was doing. Nothing changed. By the 4th month, Carla had started making comments in front of company. A neighbor of mine, Diane, came over for coffee one afternoon, something she and I had done for 15 years, and Carla sat down with us, uninvited, and within 10 minutes said, with a little laugh, "Margaret still lives like it's 1987. We've been trying to modernize the place." Diane looked at me. I looked at my coffee cup. I didn't say anything. After Diane left, I sat in my bedroom and I thought about that sentence for a long time. We've been trying to modernize the place. My place. My 31 years of living in this place, reduced to a before and after project someone else was managing. I still said nothing. I am telling you this because I want you to understand. I am not a woman who does not speak. I have stood in front of classrooms full of teenagers and commanded attention. I have negotiated salary increases and led department meetings and handled difficult parents at school conferences. Silence was not my nature. But something about being inside my own home, with my own son present, made me feel like the floor could shift at any moment. I was afraid of what saying the wrong thing might cost me time with Lily mostly. That fear kept me quieter than I should have been, for longer than I should have been. Then came the Tuesday with the kitchen. I have already told you what Carla said. You can eat after. But I want to tell you the rest of that morning, because the rest matters. I went back to my bedroom. 20 minutes later, Daniel knocked on my door. I thought he was coming to check on me. He opened the door and said, "Mom, Carla is upset. She feels like you hovering makes her anxious when she's trying to do things for the family." I looked at him. "I was walking to my kitchen, Daniel." I know. But can you just give her space this morning, for me?" I did not answer him. He took that as a yes and closed the door. I sat there and I thought about the word hovering. I thought about the word family. I thought about who had been in whose kitchen and who was wearing whose apron, and who was standing in a doorway of a room they had owned for 3 decades being asked to give space. And something in me not loudly, not dramatically, but very clearly decided that I was done. I did not say anything that day. I did not raise my voice. I want to be very clear about this. I did not become someone I wasn't. I simply became someone who was finished being silent. That afternoon, while Carla was at work and Daniel was at the library with Lily, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I wrote down everything, every instance, every date I could remember, every rearrangement, every comment, every morning I had been made to feel like a guest in my own home. I filled 4 pages. When I was done, I looked at what I had written, and I was not surprised, but I was clarified. There is something about seeing a thing written down that removes all the softness you've been using to cushion it. Then I opened my laptop and I called a woman named Patricia. Patricia had been a colleague of mine at the school. Her husband was a real estate attorney. We had stayed in close touch since retirement. I had been to her granddaughter's christening. She knew my house, knew my family, knew the whole shape of my life. I explained the situation to her, and she listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always loved about Patricia. When I finished, she said, "Margaret, do you know what a license to occupy is?" I did not. She explained it carefully. A license to occupy is an informal arrangement, and because Daniel and Carla had never signed a lease, never paid rent, never entered into any formal tenancy agreement, they did not have the legal rights of tenants. What they had was permission to be in my home, permission I had given, permission I could revoke. She told me to write a formal letter, a notice to vacate giving them 30 days. She told me to have it dated and to keep a copy. She told me her husband could review it if I wanted, and I said yes, please. I wrote the letter that evening after dinner, while everyone was watching television in the living room, the television in the living room of my house, with the volume set to whatever Carla preferred. I sat at the kitchen table with the door almost closed, and I wrote it carefully and clearly. I told them the arrangement was ending. I gave them 30 days. I thanked them for the time we had shared. I signed my name. The next morning, I printed 2 copies. I placed one in an envelope. I put the other in a folder in my filing cabinet. I did not give it to them yet. I want to explain why, because this part is important. I did not give it to them yet because I first wanted to have a conversation. I am 68 years old, and I have learned slowly, imperfectly, but I have learned that there is a difference between being decisive and being cruel. I did not want to be cruel. I wanted to give Daniel one more chance to hear me before the letter had to speak for me. That evening, I asked Daniel to sit with me at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed. He came in with his phone in his hand and set it face down in a way that told me he expected a short conversation. I told him clearly, without raising my voice, that I needed him to understand something. I told him that I had watched myself become a stranger in my own home over the past several months, and that I had stayed quiet because I loved him and I adored Lily, and I did not want to cause trouble. I told him that his wife had made comments in front of my friends that embarrassed me, that she had made decisions about my home without asking me, and that on Tuesday morning I had been told to stay out of my own kitchen. He started to say something about how Carla was stressed, about how hard the transition had been for her, and I raised one hand and I said, "Daniel, I'm not finished." He stopped. I told him I was not asking him to choose sides. I was not asking him to speak against his wife. What I was asking was simple. I needed to be treated with basic dignity in my own home. I needed to be included in decisions about my own house. And I needed to know clearly what their plan was for moving out, and by when. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I didn't know you felt this way." And I looked at my son, this man I had raised, this boy I had made lunches for and driven to baseball practice and stayed up with when he had a fever, and I said, very quietly, "I know you didn't. And that's part of the problem." He didn't answer. He picked up his phone and went to bed. The next morning, the house felt different. Carla did not speak to me directly, but she was careful, the way a person is careful when they sense that something has changed and they are not sure what. Daniel made eye contact with me over breakfast and then looked away quickly. I waited 3 days. Nothing changed. No conversation was started. No plan was offered. Carla continued to set the meal schedule. She continued to organize the living room. On Thursday evening, she moved my reading chair, the blue one by the window, the one where I had read every book I'd loved for 20 years, to a different corner because it opened up the room better. On Friday morning, after Daniel and Carla left for the day and Lily was in preschool, I placed the envelope on the kitchen table where they would see it when they came home. Then I got in my car and I drove to Patricia's house. She poured me a glass of iced tea and we sat on her back porch, and she asked me how I felt. I told her I felt very calm. She said that was the right way to feel. We talked about our grandchildren for a while. I stayed for 2 hours. It was the most peaceful I had felt in months. When I got home, Daniel's car was in the driveway, even though it was only 4 o'clock. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of him, open, the letter on the table beside it. Carla was standing at the counter with her arms crossed. Lily was in the other room watching something on the tablet, which I was grateful for. Daniel looked at me when I walked in. He looked like he wasn't sure who I was. "Mom," he said, "what is this?" I sat down across from him. I placed my hands flat on the table. I said, "You read it. You know what it is." Carla said, "This is your son, Margaret. This is your granddaughter." I turned to her. I kept my voice very even. I said, "Carla, I need you to let me speak with Daniel right now." She looked at Daniel. He gave her a small nod. She left the room. Daniel and I sat across from each other in my kitchen. The kitchen I had eaten breakfast in, made birthday cakes in, cried in, laughed in, lived in, and I said, "I had a conversation with you 3 days ago. I told you what I needed. I waited." And nothing changed. So now the letter says what I couldn't make you hear. You're kicking us out. I'm giving you 30 days to make a plan. That is not kicking anyone out. That is a mother asking her adult son to take responsibility for his family. He looked down at the table. He was quiet. Then he said, "She's not going to take this well." I said, "I know. That's not my responsibility to manage." He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he nodded, very slowly, in the way that people nod when they are accepting something they don't want to accept. It was not a happy nod, but it was an honest one, and there was something in seeing it that made my chest feel less tight than it had in months. The next 30 days were not easy. I want to be honest with you about that. Carla stopped speaking to me almost entirely, except for the necessary logistics of sharing a space. There were evenings that were very cold and quiet, in a way that required effort to sit through. Daniel moved between us like a man walking a narrow path over uncertain ground, trying not to fall to either side. But something had shifted in me that could not be shifted back. I had stopped bracing. I went back to making my coffee at 6:30. I moved my reading chair back to its place by the window. I started inviting Diane over for coffee again on Thursday afternoons. I cooked what I wanted for dinner on the nights it was my turn to cook, and when it wasn't my turn, I said good evening and went to read in my room without apology. Lily still crawled into my bed some mornings. That part did not change. Whatever was happening between the adults, she still wanted to hear stories, and I still wanted to tell them. We read about a bear who lost his hat, and a girl who planted a garden, and a rabbit who found his way home. Those mornings I held on to carefully. On the 28th day, Daniel told me they had signed a lease on an apartment 15 minutes away. They were moving on the weekend. I said, "I'm glad. I mean that, Daniel. I am genuinely glad." He looked at me, and something shifted in his face, a small opening, like a window cracking in a room that has been shut too long. He said, "I should have handled this better." I said, "Yes, but here we are." He nodded. "I love you, Mom. I love you too." That was never the question. On Saturday morning, 2 men in a truck came and carried furniture out of my guest room. By afternoon, the room was empty. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at it, the bare mattress, the marks on the wall where their picture frames had hung, the late afternoon light coming through the window the same way it always had. I went and got my own things, a quilt I had stored in the closet, a lamp from the hall, a small watercolor of the Texas hill country that I had always meant to put somewhere and never had. I spent an hour making the room feel like mine again. When I was done, I sat on the edge of the bed, and the house was quiet, and it was the quiet that belonged to me. That evening, I made a real dinner for the first time in months. Not the careful cooking of someone sharing a kitchen, but the kind where you take your time, and use every burner, and leave the radio on, and don't apologize for the smell of garlic. I made a pasta I had loved for years. I opened a bottle of wine. I ate at my own table with Steinbeck on the chair beside me, and when I was done I washed the dishes slowly and dried them, and put them exactly where they had always lived. I want to tell you something I have been thinking about since all of this ended. There is a belief that loving your family means absorbing whatever they give you, that a mother's love should be endless in its tolerance, that the right thing to do is always to hold on, bend, accommodate, give more. I believed that for a long time. I am 68 years old, and I taught that belief to myself for decades without meaning to. But I think there is a different kind of love, a harder kind, in some ways, but a more honest one. It is the love that says, I will not become invisible for you. I will not disappear from my own life so that you can be more comfortable in it. I will not let this house become something I have to survive, rather than something I get to live in. That is not coldness. That is not selfishness. That is the kind of love that tells the truth. I have seen Daniel twice since they moved out. Both times were fine, careful, still the way things are when they are in the process of becoming something new but fine. Lily still asks me to read to her when she visits. Last Sunday she fell asleep on my couch with her head in my lap, and I sat very still for a long time so I wouldn't wake her. The reading chair is back by the window. The cast-iron skillet is in its place. The kitchen smells like coffee in the morning the way it is supposed to. I watch the news in the evening with the volume where I like it. Some nights the house feels very quiet. I won't pretend otherwise. Quiet is not always the same as peaceful, and peaceful is not always the same as happy, and I am still finding my way among all three of those things. But I am finding my way in my own home, in my own time, on my own terms, and that after everything is more than enough. If you are someone who has been told, in one way or another, that your presence in your own life is an inconvenience, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to sit in your own chair. You are allowed to say, clearly and without apology, that this is where I live, and I will not be moved. You are allowed to choose yourself, not instead of love alongside it. In spite of the fear, even when the people you love most are the ones making you afraid, you are allowed to be at home.